Is my beard omniscient? Silly topic, true, but it's not pulled out of nowhere. Ocean Keltoi once made a video, which is currently unlisted for some reason, using the McEar objection to omnipotence to show that their beard is in fact omnipotent. After watching that video, it got me thinking, couldn't something like the McEar objection be applied to omniscience as well? Before going into omniscience, I will summarize what the McEar objection to omnipotence is. In simple terms, the McEar objection stems from what happens when a being has both omnipotence and some other trait. For example, can an all-good being lie? According to Hebrews 6:18, it is impossible for God to lie. This has led many Christian thinkers to try to understand how God could both not do something and still remain omnipotent. Ultimately, the solution that many came up with, though it's not the only one, is the idea that as long as God was able to do all things possible without creating logical issues, that means that God is still omnipotent, even if that means there are things that God cannot do. The problem is that it means that one can conceive of a being that, as a necessary truth, can only ever scratch its ear. This being, called McEar, can be deemed to be omnipotent as long as it is actually able to scratch its ear. Ocean Keltoi, in his video, defined his beard as having both the traits of omnibeardliness as well as omnipotence. The omnibeardliness, acting as a logical limit, makes it so that the beard is able to do all things that beards can do, and thus is an omnipotent beard. So, how can we apply this to omniscience then? This is because, as I will hopefully demonstrate, omniscience also needs to be limited to knows all things without creating logical issues. To explain, there are different types of knowledge. Two of them, which I will cover in this video, is knowing the truth behind a preposition, and qualia. Qualia is the type of knowledge you get from subjective experience. The usual go-to example for this is this thought experiment. Imagine there is a brilliant color scientist that has spent their entire life in a room that makes it so that everything observed is black and white. She even has access to cameras that record the outside world, but the image is also in black and white. Imagine she spends all of her time learning everything there is to know about the color red. Every fact that you can think of, she knows it, but she's never actually seen the color red. If at this point she is allowed to leave this room and observe the color red firsthand, she will have actually learned something new, namely, what it's like to experience the color red. From this we can know there's a type of knowledge that is only gained from experience, and so we need to ask, does an omniscient being know what it is like to be ignorant on something? If they do, then that means they must have been ignorant at some point, but they can't have been ignorant, as they are omniscient. It creates a paradox. What's more, let's say that the omniscient being is also omnipotent. Do they know what it's like to be impotent? Much like with ignorance, this also creates a logical issue. But we might feel safe thinking that it's fine so long as the omniscient being knows the truth behind every proposition, even if they don't have all knowledge when it comes to experience. But what about a timeless and thus unchanging being? This can also lead to logical problems. For example, let's look at the proposition, is Joe Biden the current president of the United States? The answer, at least at the time I'm recording this, is yes. But was the answer yes a decade ago? How about a decade from now? The answer will have changed from no to yes to no again. But the problem is that this is a change in knowledge, and that is impossible for a timeless and thus unchanging being to go through. A change in knowledge is a change, yet the being is unchanging. So, ultimately, this means that omniscience, much like omnipotence, can be conceived of as knowing all things without creating logical issues. However, with this definition of omniscience, we can conclude that my beard is omniscient, in much the same way that Ocean Keltoi's beard is omnipotent. I can just define my beard, much like Ocean Keltoi's, as having the trait of omnibeardliness. Because it has this trait acts as a logical limit. So long as my beard is able to know things that beards normally would know, even if that's nothing, we can then define it as also being omniscient. And so, following from a similar line of logic that leads to the McEar objection to omnipotence, we can make a similar objection to omniscience. Of course, people might define omniscience or omnipotence in different ways, but all this just leads to the question of if the tri-omni God that many monotheists subscribe to is even coherent to begin with. This might not be the end-all be-all to show that there's logical issues with it, but it does raise up some valid questions in my mind.